starting your own thing feels like this big, daunting, I got to start a company. It's this crazy big leap to make. But in so many ways, it's just felt like a school project that just kept going. Like it felt like we just were in a team project, we were working on something, and then each day you're adding a brick to it, and all of a sudden you've got something 6 months later, and you don't need to know everything when you get started.
Well, hi there, and welcome to Side Hustle Hero, the show that inspires action and helps you to grow your side hustle into a thriving income stream. I'm your host, Joan Posivy. Most of us start a side hustle to make extra money. And if we want to give back, we think of that as something separate. Maybe it's volunteering or donating to a cause that we care about. But what if you could do both at the same time? What if your side hustle could also be about making a difference? Well, that's what Andrew Hall did. He co-founded Mealshare, a nonprofit that partnered with restaurants to provide meals to youth in need. What started on evenings and weekends eventually grew to over 500 restaurant partners and delivered more than 1 million meals a year. We talk about how he got it off the ground for less than $100, the key differences between charities, nonprofits, and for-profits, and how you might decide which model makes sense for your idea. We also get into his current business, which also started as a side hustle, No Story Lost, which helps families preserve loved ones' life stories, and how that landed him a pitch on Dragon's Den, which is like Canada's version of Shark Tank. So if you've ever wondered whether you can build something that more than pays the bills and does good in the world, you'll find some how-to answers here in my conversation with Andrew Hall. Well, welcome, Andrew.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, I've really been looking forward to our conversation because when you told me about Mealshare, I thought, we need to have you on the show for our listeners who would love to create a side hustle, but one with a strong social component, like a way of giving back. And you did that through setting up a nonprofit. But as a business major who spent time in the corporate world, why choose that path? Why a nonprofit?
So when my cousin and I set out to start Mealshare, obviously the concept that we had lent itself to something to do with nonprofits, charities, that sort of thing. And the concept was we were inspired by Tom's Shoes, which is a buy one, give one shoe company. If you buy a pair of shoes, they'll give a pair of shoes away. And we thought to ourselves, that's super cool. Love the model. What's even more important than shoes? And we landed on food. So it was the giving thing. It was in the spirit of giving back. So of course, we looked at a for-profit, we looked at nonprofits and charities. Now, we ran this in Canada and we actually expanded to the States. So we explored all the technicalities of how to shape the business. But I would say, firstly, the kind of psychological way we thought of the business was actually as a social enterprise. And that's not a legal structure. It's just the thought that maybe you can provide business value and also create impact. So that's the way we wanted it to work. Nothing against charities that just run on handouts funding donors, but we wanted to run a business that also created positive impact. From there, choosing the actual business structure kind of came second, but we wanted to come to businesses and say, look, you're going to put this logo on some of your menu items. We're going to outsource your giving function, which you might or might not be doing. And it'll be something you can talk about with all your customers. You can put it next to a higher margin menu item to try to get people to buy that item to provide impact. So we did come, like you said, as business students, and then also wanting to take a business lens. And as a very intentional byproduct of providing business value, create social impact.
So did it end up being a for-profit business or a nonprofit in the legal sense?
It ended up being a nonprofit, and we kind of weighed the different options. So in Canada, you've got for-profit companies, similar structure to American companies. And then you also have registered charities, which would be most similar to a 501c3. And then there's this middle ground in Canada where you can run a nonprofit. They're super easy to start. They're like $100. They give you baseline legal structure to run with just as a foundation. So you can kick them off pretty easily. And that'll range, like nonprofits in Canada will be anything from like your local rugby club to the little organization that has a little charitable impact to really big ones as well. So that was a flexible structure for us to take on, especially as, I mean, we're here talking about side hustles. So nice to find something that we could just get off the ground, take the standard bylaws and just get going doing work rather than having to a charity can cost thousands of dollars to open and take a long time. So we were looking for how can we have a flexible organization that, again, hits the ground running for $100 rather than getting caught up in red tape right off the bat.
So you were provided through the provincial registry, that framework, those documents.
That's right.
Wow. Okay. So in addition to that, then, what would be helpful for our listeners to know the differences between that nonprofit model and for-profit? Again, I know it's going to differ country to country, maybe state, province, region, but in general terms.
Yeah. So you really want to check into the main broad strokes differences and say, what am I trying to create? What kind of impact am I trying to have? And which one lets me do that better? Okay. So when we think of charities and donating to charities, we often think of charitable donation receipts. You have to be a registered charity to provide that to a person or to a donor, whereas a nonprofit cannot do that.
Right.
Charities also get audited. The paperwork's more complex to set up. And charities, once they've received money, cannot do the same number of things with their funding. They kind of need to keep their money within the charitable sector or be spending it on a really directly related activity to the impact that they're registered for. Mm-hmm. Whereas a nonprofit has much more flexibility in terms of like contracts it can sign, things it can spend money on. So again, our model being a little bit different than others, we wanted this more flexible entity. It came with the downside that we couldn't receive grants and we couldn't give tax receipts, but that was okay for the first while. We ended up having both in the end, and that got more complex. But
so in general terms, so how does a nonprofit differ from a for-profit?
Good question. You don't pay corporate tax, so that's a benefit as a nonprofit. There are some things you can apply for that are only available to nonprofits as opposed to for-profits. I would say it's actually simpler to start a nonprofit than a for-profit, although starting a pretty simple for-profit's also not terribly complicated.
Yeah.
And then there's just the social aspect of when I tell somebody, hey, this is what we are, this is what Mealshare is, we're a nonprofit, that carries some weight. Not the same as a registered charity, but it lets somebody know, oh, like you're collecting donations, you're not a for-profit. It just helps a lot with speaking to restaurants to be a nonprofit.
Are there any restrictions in terms of how that nonprofit spends money or percentage of salaries, anything like that?
I think there are, but they're much more open than registered charities. Yeah, it's been a while. We started that in 2013 and it wrapped up in 2021. So I don't know the exact details anymore, but again, like so much more flexibility than a registered charity.
And in terms of you not being able to issue tax receipts, a lot of your customers really were the restaurants, right? So that's going to show up for them as a line item and somehow like promotional or like something. It's still, they're going to be able to expense it. So that, I guess, wasn't a hurdle. But tell us what Mealshare actually was.
Yeah. So we brought that Tom's concept and opened it up so that many restaurants could participate in it. So we actually had an initial idea, which is like, do we start a restaurant and we also provide meals to youth in need?
Okay, that's way different.
We realized that's a pretty good way to lose a lot of money because the restaurant industry is so tough. So we were like, how could we activate restaurants to do this? So we partnered with them, provided our logo and a little description to go at the bottom. So you've seen this, even if the logo says like vegetarian or something, like restaurants were already putting logos on menus with an explanation at the bottom. So we were fitting into this existing way of labeling menus at least.
Okay.
But the logo would say, this meal will provide one meal to a youth in need.
Oh. So the logo, it would be a Mealshare logo.
A Mealshare logo.
That would go on that line item on the menu. Okay,
on that item. Yeah. Some would have one, some would have 5 items on their menu. And then at the end of the month, restaurants would send us their sales report and show us all the items they sold and then pay us for every Mealshare item. And then we would use that money to then buy a meal for the youth through either a local charity or an international charity. And then you were asking about costs. So it was just $1 from every Mealshare item because local meals would cost us between $1 and $3 per meal to provide a local meal. Through local shelters, that was kind of their cost to provide a meal. And then international ones might be more like 10, 15, 20 cents. So then we'd average the cost of our meals. So say we had to provide 500 in a city, it might be 300 here, 300 there, or 250, 250. And then we would keep 30 cents on each dollar to run the business. So 70 cents would be our average meal cost. Sometimes we'd have to provide more international meals and fewer local ones, depending on the cost of the local meal.
Okay. So if there was so if I'm the customer in the restaurant, there's a line item there for $10.
Yeah.
Then at the end of the month, the restaurant would send you how much?
$1 for each one that they sold. So if they sold 500 of that dish, they'd send us $500.
Okay.
Restaurants have tight margins as well. So being able
Yes.
to keep it at a low figure kind of worked for them too.
Got it. So coming in the door, you'd be getting $1 per meal, and you find that your net cost was around 70 cents a meal.
Yeah. And then if you want to put it into like SaaS terms, we had restaurants would usually be around $300 MRR. And then they would last anywhere from either they like wouldn't really take off. We'd get 3 months out of them, but they would stick with us for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, maybe like 2 to 3 years on average. And then not a lot of variable costs. We had like a retention program where our local community reps would go out and visit them, or they would run a little event or that sort of thing, stay in touch. We would provide a monthly giving certificate that they could put up on their pin board. So a little bit of interaction back and forth.
The restaurant.
Yeah, with the restaurant. Yeah. We'd
Right,
actually take
nice.
them to the local charity as well to let them see the impact they were having. Those nights were really important for retention as well. We would take the restaurant staff to the local charity and let them interact and give meals away and see the impact they
Nice.
were having. That was a really good piece too.
And was it up to the restaurant to choose the charity, or was that something that you designated?
We chose the charities for any given city. And then these restaurants would have a little bit of say if we had multiple local charities or if they had a cause really important to them.
Right.
But it wasn't until we were quite far along that we would have 2 or 3 charities in a city.
Right. And what did you say you were doing for retention to help keep the restaurants as part of Mealshare?
Yeah, charity volunteer nights,
Okay.
monthly giving certificates, an annual giving report, and then sometimes a local, like an event we'd have for multiple restaurant owners or just a drop in and talk about the impact with the staff kind of thing.
Right. Which is all great exposure and PR for them.
Totally. Yeah. Whenever we do a launch in a city, we try to launch 5 or 10 restaurants on at the same time, and then we'd go PR as well.
Oh, okay. And how did you physically do that? Did you and your cousin land in that town and start knocking on doors, or?
We didn't travel much for it. At the
Okay.
start, I was in Victoria and Jeremy was in Edmonton. And then I traveled to Vancouver. He traveled to Calgary a little bit. And then soon after that, we'd start hiring local reps to support us. And yeah, Canada's a huge country. It's expensive to fly across. So when we wanted to be in Toronto, we hired someone in Toronto.
Oh, okay. You mentioned area reps. How did that work?
So yeah, we hired a community leader in each city. And that person was a pretty dynamic role where they would need to be a salesperson to restaurants, but then also be that retention person.
Yes.
And they would work with the local charity. So we had these launch seasons where you would spend 3 or 4 months trying to call restaurants. And then certain seasons where we wouldn't go anywhere near them, like Christmas time, they're full of Christmas parties. We weren't going to try to contact restaurants then.
Right.
So we got to learn the dynamics of restaurants a little bit. But yeah, that role would start at part-time. And then once somebody had 20 or 30 restaurants on, they'd kind of be supporting their own role through the fundraising. And then they could start taking on more hours. And
Right.
eventually we'd have full-time community leaders in each city.
Nice. How did the pay structure work with them, with the community leaders?
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty humble in the nonprofit industry, but they
Yeah.
start at a half-time salary. And then it was really more about expanding their hours usually than really expanding their pay. And then we had a good structure for annual raises and then like a management position that people could grow into as well if they wanted to manage other community leaders.
And how far was your expansion?
Across Canada, we got to about 500 partner restaurants across the country. And then I think probably 20 or 30 in the States. We went down to San Antonio for a pitch competition and won some
Right.
funding there and used it to expand the program. So we had a little base in Texas for a little while.
Okay.
Couldn't really grow it beyond that just without a strong kind of founder presence in the
Yes.
States. But yeah, 20 team members, and we were doing about 1 million meals a year by the end. Then we had A&W come on board, and they were a Canadian partner across the country with 1,000 locations. So they kind of tripled us overnight, but right as
Nice.
COVID was starting.
Oh, man.
And
Really?
the pilot didn't really take off because I talked about all those retention things we would do. Well, we weren't supposed to go into their restaurants and we couldn't go to the local charities. So it was really hard for us to show the impact. And I think that's kind of where the partnership failed. So, but they actually had a lot of impact with us in a short time. And we really felt like this was the big thing that was like, okay, now we've got more than enough funding. We're going to be providing 3 times as many meals. And we saw it lasting a long time. And then, yeah, and then it was quite a challenging year or two, shrinking and winding down.
Right. And so that's what you did, in fact, do was wind down, basically, because all the restaurants were pulling back.
Yeah. We went from 500 to, I think, about 70 or 80 partners within a month.
Okay.
And even those ones were down kind of half as the numbers they used to be doing.
Right.
So I can't think of too many businesses that can survive a 90% drop for very long.
Yeah.
Especially once you've expanded, right? And you have a big team and a big payroll. So yeah, there were some good subsidies in Canada to keep people working for a while. But after several months of that, it was clear we had to shrink the team quite a bit. And then we had a little bit of a revival. We stepped away and put one of our long-standing team members stepped up to be the executive director. And they ran it for a solid another year. But then still, like that industry just got hit so hard that they were digging out of a hole for 2 or 3 years at least, the ones that even survived. So it just wasn't a time that we could run the program anymore. So yeah, we had visions of transitioning away from it beautifully and hanging on to the next person. But
especially after A&W stepped in.
Totally. But yeah, it wasn't the way it went in the end, which was too bad.
Mm-hmm. So that million meals would have translated into $1 million in revenue for Mealshare, right?
Yeah.
Which would have netted you about $300,000.
Yeah, for gross margin. And then we also had some funders who were supporting head office as well. So I think the operating budget after pay for meals would have been more like $400K or something.
Mm-hmm. So what were your average salaries?
Yeah, we started off with, okay, we've just got this off the ground. We have 8 partners. We can pay ourselves $500 a month and pay our rent kind of thing.
Right.
This is 2013, 3 of us just out of school.
Wow.
By the end, 70 or 80,000 a year. I think.
Each.
Yeah.
So this started as a side hustle. Yeah.
It did. Yeah. Yeah. Because I graduated from BCom and got a job in consulting and with one of the big 4 companies, and my co-founder was as well. He was in accounting with another one, and we would chat all the time about running our own thing someday. And like on Monday mornings, waking up and chatting to each other instead of putting on our suits and heading into the office. So we had this idea; it wouldn't get out of our heads, and we kicked it off and got the first 4 restaurants on board, evenings, weekends, whenever we'd be traveling to one of those cities. And then I think it was about 6 or 7 months of doing that in the evenings after a consulting gig. Like that first summer, I remember not doing much other than working on Mealshare. And then I went in and I remember quitting, feeling like I was throwing my life away, feeling a lot of pressure on that decision. But I had committed to it, and Jeremy had actually quit earlier. He burned the ships a bit earlier, but I'd committed that I would also do the same. And I went to leave, and I thought it was like, I didn't give it enough of an open mind leaving the job, because I thought to myself, well, these guys don't hire half-time consultants. You're either in or you're out. So I'm just going to quit. Yes. And when I went to quit, my manager said, well, why don't you take a leave of absence? Take 6 or 8 months. We'll keep you in the system. And if you want to come back, you can come back, which was a beautiful.
Wow. Very nice
for me. Right. And then I figured, okay, with 6 more months, like we can probably be off the ground. I can be paying my rent at least, hopefully. Yes. And then if it fails, then I just go back. No problem. So it's a good lesson to always think outside the box and try to get as much of the upside that you can out of a situation, and not just think always black and white. There was another 3rd or 4th alternative that ended up being offered to me, but that was so helpful.
Yeah, that it didn't have to be all or one, especially when there were so many uncertainties with Mealshare.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, that just gave me like a sandbox to safely build in for 6 months and not be so stressed that if that failed, then I'd have this big hole in my resume and nowhere to go. I could easily just go back to where I was.
Yeah. How much support, like, I'm assuming maybe there was some family support in putting you through university?
Yeah, we did both come out of school without debt, which was really helpful.
Nice. So
We
what was that kind of reaction then from your family?
Yeah.
Oh, geez. Okay. He's got this business degree and he's going to set up this nice little nonprofit.
Yeah, honestly, a lot of support. Like I
Nice.
didn't make the decision without talking to them.
Hmm.
But I think if you're looking at your kid and they say they want to go help the world, you can't fault them too much. You
Right.
hope
Yeah.
that they
Yeah.
land on their feet. But I had put in a year and a half by the time I was done. So I had a little bit of savings from that first consulting job. Yeah, and through school, like our parents did help us, but any summer job we worked like that went towards school too. So they
Right.
got us the rest of the way to not have to take out debt, but we weren't given like a total free pass. Somewhere in the middle, lots of support. And then yeah, we just also did kind of do the startup founder shoestring ramen thing for a
Right.
while. We didn't get to 70 or $80,000 salaries in 2 years. Like we were living humble for a long time.
That would have been towards the end of the run for Mealshare, where
Yeah,
you're pulling
for
that
sure.
that kind as well.
Yeah.
With a corporation, public corporation, you've got the board of directors, the shareholders that you're sort of answering to.
Mhm.
I guess with the nonprofit, there isn't really any of that. It was just yourself, partners, and of course your customers, the restaurant.
There is actually then,
There is?
and
Okay.
as a nonprofit, you need to have a board of directors,
Okay.
arm's length. So
Mhm.
that's a little bit of oversight that
Oh.
I did maybe mention earlier on. So minimum of three, but I think they encourage five members of the board. And usually in a for-profit company, the CEO is going to take a seat on the board, but that's
Okay.
not the case in nonprofits. So we were not able to be paid as employees and also be board
Right.
members.
Okay.
And we had a board of advisors as well. So you're responsible to the board of directors, and then the board of directors in the paperwork is responsible back to the members of the society. So there's
Right.
like kind of the triangle of oversight, which is good. I mean,
Yeah.
if you're going to be telling donors that you're a nonprofit, you would hope that there'd be some checks and balances.
Right. And are those board positions, because it's a nonprofit, generally volunteer?
Yeah, they cannot be paid for their board.
Oh, they
presence.
can't. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So that's something to consider then.
Yeah.
And I guess the accounting costs, legal costs would be a little bit more because of the paperwork that you got to submit. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, I don't know if necessarily more, but it's something to factor in.
Okay.
Big fortunate thing for us is Jeremy's parents have an accounting firm. So that whole side of
Nice.
things was always donated for us.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, getting something off the ground, especially a nonprofit, you got to use what's available to you and
Hmm.
accept the support of whoever you can ask for help. But the other nice thing about having our training wheels on with starting a nonprofit was everyone wants to help. So we weren't begging for help so that we could go grow a business and become wealthy. It was like support
Right.
us with this cool mission and fun business. So.
Very cool. Well, for someone wanting to earn a bit of income as a side hustle and they have a strong social drive, would you recommend that they look at or look into a nonprofit model?
Sure. I wouldn't suggest it just off the top because there are other complications and more difficulties with it. But if you're trying to make an impact, if the goal is to make a social impact, then it makes a lot of sense to explore those models for your jurisdiction. And there were even other new ones that were popping up when we were around, and then maybe there are even newer ones since. There's also B Corps. There's like many different vehicles and ways to go about
Right.
it. So I would say
Okay.
first think about what the impact is you want to have. You kind of mentioned if someone wants to make impact and make some side income. So in
Yes.
that case, it would be more social enterprise. But if you just wanted to go make an impact, you might pick a different vehicle. So I would say figure out your goals first. Is it just impact or is it impact and income? And then secondly, what will you be doing to create the impact? Are you fundraising? Are you volunteering? Are you gathering volunteers?
Right.
And then once you like the structure of the impact you want to make and you know your goals, then choose the vehicle. So figure out the goals before you pick the vehicle.
So what were some surprises or maybe biggest challenges with running a nonprofit that you didn't anticipate?
The biggest early challenge for us was bringing a whole new idea to market. So when you go and knock on doors and say, I'm a landscaper, people know what you're talking about. If you
Okay.
open whatever business on the street and you say dry cleaner, people know what that is. If you go up to a restaurant and say, hey, we're a buy one, get one model for restaurants to help you provide meals to youth in need, they're like, what is that? I've never heard of it. I have nothing to even compare it to, really. So we
Right.
were doing so much educating that the sales process was really difficult. So we tuned it over the years, but yeah. And then my next business that I started as a side hustle while running Mealshare is also kind of a new concept. So again, it's not to say one's better or worse, but it's a challenge to run an entire new concept. And every business has its pros and cons, but
Right.
introducing something new is tough.
Because a common line for people is, oh, well, it's the Uber of this.
Uh,
And people get it. But when
yeah,
you're creating something new, not so much.
you might not even have that analogy. Yeah. So that was a challenge. Yeah. And I mean, we were running a social enterprise and trying to provide business value. But at the end of the day, like the gifts to charity for a struggling business would usually be the first to be cut. So it was also a challenge to be always feel like we were asking and not that we were providing like a vital service. So you sometimes hear advice when trying to create a B2B business to be like as close to the wallet as you can, either be providing them revenue or cutting their costs. And I don't
Right.
feel like we were doing either of those things. So being more on the periphery of a nice thing to do meant that we were easily dropped when they had to make hard decisions. That's
Right.
another challenge.
But that's really good tip in terms of considering what sort of product or service that you're going to offer. Yeah. I spent a lot of time in the construction industry, and a lot of the contractors I know, they would say the last person that you want to be is the people installing the kitchen, because by then, if the money's going to run out, it'd be already gone. All right. So you want to be the person
Yeah,
pouring the
right.
foundation or doing the rough framing, right?
First guy at the site. Yeah.
Right.
Got it.
Exactly.
Nice.
Well, what advice would you give to aspiring social entrepreneurs who want to make a meaningful impact while building a sustainable business?
I think being really clear on what the impact is you want to make.
Okay.
So if you are, first of all, you kind of need this for registering as a proper charity. You have to have what your end cause is. But there are a lot of distractions for every possible donor, customer, etc. And if you can't get your message across for what the dream is, the dream impact is that you're selling really quickly,
Yes.
you'll lose attention. So ours was kind of complex. And we could have probably written 2 lines at the end of every menu, but we really worked on like how short can we get that message so people get it?
Right.
Like you want to make it as simple as possible without being too simple, without losing the meaning. So we played with so many different ways to write on the bottom of the menu. Like one meal will be provided to a youth in need, but it was kids. We had to keep youth. So that was like as short as we got it. So clarity of message and like how quickly or briefly can you get strong emotion across? So if someone gets it, the impact they're making, can they like join your dream with you or join your cause with you
Right.
in a clear and concise way?
Great. And that's great advice for pretty much any side hustle in this day of scrolling and needing to create that understanding within seconds.
Totally. So this is great advice for any marketing in terms of what benefit are you immediately giving them? And in nonprofit, it might be what passion or emotion can you quickly get across so they
Right.
support your mission. Really similar.
Yeah. Well, not knowing much about operating a nonprofit, I don't know what I don't know. Is there something that I should have asked you that I haven't yet?
I don't think so. Like one of my early points I would give when I was speaking to students back at my university or doing public speaking for kids with this nonprofit that we had, people wanted to hear our story because it was a couple 23-year-olds going to try to change the world. And one thing that hit me, and I think totally applies to my main advice about side hustles, is starting your own thing feels like this big, daunting, I got to start a company. It's this crazy big leap to make. But in so many ways, it's just like felt like a school project that just kept going. Like it felt like we just were in a team project. We were working on something, and then
Right.
each day you're adding a brick to it, and all of a sudden you've got something 6 months later, and you don't need to know everything when you get started. Yeah, there's mistakes to avoid and there's places to be careful,
Yes.
but like just getting going, getting like the snowball kind of started.
You learn so much.
Yeah, and you learn as you go, and you assemble the plane on the way down through the air, if you've heard that one.
Yes, absolutely. Because when you're in pitching those restaurants on why they should join Mealshare, I'm sure there was times that you came across objections and you thought, oh, hadn't heard that one before. Let's see. Next time I'll answer it this way. And
Exactly. Yeah, you build the knowledge base, and then the next time you answer that question really well. But that was the thing, is like starting a nonprofit, again, might have felt like this really daunting thing. And so to go back and answer your question, like, is there something you didn't know? No, we just kind of were like, well, we would have to tell the story, go ask people if they'd be into it. They said that they would be generally into it. Then, okay, well, then we'll need a logo to put on their menu, and then off you go. And
right.
So it was more familiar than I thought it would be in advance.
And I know you've got an understanding of the importance of, if you're selling someone, the importance of making that emotional connection, number one, and number two, being crystal clear. Here's the offer. And that was very evident in your pitch to Dragon's Den. Now, that wasn't for Mealshare. That was for another organization you started. Tell us about that one.
Right. Yeah. So Jeremy and I got back to it, trying to create another business to make the world better. In this case, we started by writing my grandfather's story, the grandfather that we have in common, actually. So all our lives, we've heard our family say, like, someone should write down his stories. And then no one did anything about it. So finally, we sat with him and typed out while he told us old stories. And we put together the very first No Story Lost book, which was very short, black and white, not the finest work you've ever seen, but we got it done, and our family loved it, and it was a lot of work, and we were just like bumbling through it. So we thought, this is probably a business because it's super valuable, and it just kind of sucked to do it. So if someone could take it off your hands,
because everybody's not going to do this. So this didn't start out as a business idea, and the grandfather was a test case. No, kind of the opposite of that.
Right. And then we thought, well, let's find out. Let's do 1 or 2 family and friends projects and see if we can run it using all the lessons we just learned and do it for a reasonable budget. So we obviously started too cheap and couldn't pull it off at that price, but we did a couple friends and family ones, and that was fine to just break even and figure it out. And then similarly, what if we put up a website? What if we said what it was? Would any strangers come and buy projects? And then they did. So yeah, it was a Wix site first, and eventually we changed to Shopify. And yeah, the first day where a strange name comes into your inbox and someone buys a project is such a delight.
Wow.
Yeah. And then I think it was only 2 years in that we got on Dragon's Den, which was super fun. So I think it was COVID when we applied. So we just applied with a video, and we did some video interviews, and then off we went to Toronto. I got not even close to enough sleep, woke up, turned out to be on the first pitch of that morning. So we were on the stage by 8 a.m. and I'd flown from BC, so it was 5 a.m. for me, and you're in under these bright lights and a little bit delirious. But yeah, the pitch was 40 minutes long, and then they just cut it down to 8, I think.
Right.
So there's a lot cut, but I think they did a great job of reflecting what it was like. And luckily, they did a nice job of making us look like 2 good Canadian kids, because they can edit things to kind of look however they want.
Yes.
And sometimes they have the person like caught frozen in a moment, or they make it look like they stumped them or whatever. So we got a good edit too, which was nice.
Which is completely out of your control.
Totally.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I guess you can try to control what you say, but it could be spun for sure. And one thing I loved was, like, my main reflection is that it was very real. I'd seen like friends on TV shows. I actually was on a game show once, and my friend was on Amazing Race. And so I've seen sometimes where it's cut. Could you do that again with a little more energy? And like that kind of thing could be frustrating. But this was just 40 minutes, no interruptions, no cuts, no nothing. Just like a real business pitch, which was really refreshing. In this case, it was just people yelling over top of each other, interrupting each other. And we had to try to like command the room to get an answer out.
Oh, really? So you mentioned the importance of the emotional connection. Tell us about the special book that you gave to one of the dragons.
Yeah.
And how the heck did you do that?
Yeah. The producers asked us during tryouts if we had any unique ideas, and we had a couple. And one of them was to connect behind the scenes with one of the dragon's parents, write their life story and get it to them and have them open it on stage. We tried with two of them. One of them kind of fell apart, but in 5 weeks, we put together our fastest book we ever had by interviewing Manjeet's dad and like printed locally to save some time, like rushed through each of the steps, but we had a physical book on stage for her. So you're telling this story about this is for parents and grandparents, and like in theory it would be really nice to capture their story, and 5 dragons open up a generic book, but one picks up a book about their dad. So it was a really powerful moment.
And did she honestly not know about it until she unwrapped it?
I don't think she did. I'd like to think I have a good BS detector.
Yeah.
And I think either she's a great actress or it was legit. Yeah.
Wow.
We talked directly with her dad and we never mentioned it to her. We weren't even in touch with her before. So
well, no, because it was supposed to be a surprise, right? So
unless he let it slip, then I think it was real. Yeah. Which is fun. We haven't done too many of those. Mm-hmm. But if you're working from recordings or working with like a sibling, you can sometimes surprise one of the siblings with the book, which is pretty fun.
What a fabulous idea. All right. Tell us about the end result. So
we got exactly one offer from only one dragon. I don't think you will have trouble guessing which dragon offered an investment. And we said yes on stage, and we met a few weeks later and didn't actually close anything in real life, which I think happens from time to time.
Yes.
We just didn't really see eye to eye on like how the investors would be involved, what the valuation should be. And I think it was like really amicable. This is the kind of deal we'd want to see. This is the kind of deal we'd want to see. And it just didn't connect. So, but yeah, they were super nice to work with for a couple meetings after the show.
Yeah. And again, all that learning experience for whatever happens in the future for you.
Yeah. And a bucket list item. Like we watched the show a bunch as kids. So it was cool to be on the stage.
Right. Huh. So tell us about No Story Lost. What is it exactly?
So yeah, today, the way that it works is we interview a loved one over the phone or over Zoom. So you might buy a project for, let's say, one of your parents. We would interview them on the phone and then transcribe the interviews, write a manuscript, and then gather your favorite photos, their favorite colors, a cover photo, and then produce a beautiful coffee table book. So then it becomes a family heirloom, hopefully, to page through when you're all together and reflect on an important person's life.
Such a unique gift for family members, kids, grandchildren. So what's next for No Story Lost?
So we are just cranking out projects now, have grown quite a bit in the past few years, and are exploring B2B projects. So capturing stories for businesses who are reaching milestone anniversaries.
Nice.
So we've had a couple of those come our way. So if they're coming inbound, we thought maybe we go check that out too. So we're reaching out to businesses who might be turning 20 or 30 or 40 and maybe have a founder still around who has a story to tell. But other than that, just more family projects. The team's slowly growing. So yeah, it hasn't taken off like hockey stick the way you might hope, but just like consistent, slow, compounding, healthy growth, I think. So
yeah. Is it just you and Jeremy at this point?
Yeah, and then a big supportive team to make the books actually happen. So we have, you know what, we actually have our same admin genius from Mealshare who came over to No Story Lost with us when Mealshare shut down. So that's been really nice.
Wow.
We've worked together for over 10 years. She's a rock star and she knows how to work with us so well and does all the things that we aren't good at and don't like doing. So that's awesome. And then we have a project coordinator, a bunch of writer and editors, transcriptionists, designers. So a big supportive cast to pull it all together. But.
Right. And this would all be contract work as opposed to employees.
Yes. And that's a really big point I would love to share with Side Hustle folks is when we planned our next thing after Mealshare, we had lots of chats. And this was while we were still running Mealshare, but like if we started another thing, what would it look like? What would it need to be?
Yes.
There are obviously moonshot startups that want to take investment, go big and make a giant impact. Awesome. We said we wouldn't mind doing another one we can start it small. We could start it on the side now, low risk, low startup capital. And what would that look like? And so one other really nice element with it was we always take payment up front and then we pay our contractors as the work goes. And they started as contractors so that we don't get caught in month 5 when no one buys a project and we have payroll. So
Right.
all we had was a project comes in, it costs $1,600. We then are going to save the amount of cost that we think we're going to have on that project.
Yeah.
Got a bit of margin to work with. We were still working other jobs, so we didn't need to like pull salary either. And we had very little fixed costs. So like running a Wix website was the extent of it. It was
Yeah,
like,
right. Yeah.
started with like less than $100 a month. That was like our burn. So
Right.
that just gave us so much freedom to have lower stress, to
Right.
keep the business just alive longer,
Mm-hmm.
and not have to worry about, oh, we went out of business or we threw in $5 more grand each because we were burning too much. Just let us, like, that recipe for a side hustle was so nice. So you can
Yes.
try to think of ways to structure either the cash flow or a low burn to help you get it off the ground without adding a bunch of stress or having to shut it down early. That was the greatest gift, the best decision we made.
Absolutely, because then you've got the majority of that mental energy focused on growth and what could we do better and improve and expand versus, oh my God, where are we going to get this, like you said, the payroll done?
Yeah, there are enough sleepless nights and stresses with running a business that if you can pull cash flow out of that list for a while, that's really nice.
Yeah. So at one point you left the corporate world and they said, hey, you could always come back part-time even as a consultant.
Yeah.
Did you ever walk back into that door?
Never went back in the door. No. After 6 months or so, I think they even kept me on benefits for a while. It was so nice.
Yes.
So I had to give that up 6 months later and I had to give the official word. But no, I picked up the odd contract here or there for consulting things, or I built a website. But haven't been back. Haven't been back into an office.
Yeah. So you were doing Mealshare full time when you started No Story Lost as the side hustle.
Totally. Yeah.
So this is your full time now.
Yeah. And I do a little bit of coaching. So I have 2 or 3 coaching clients at a time.
Yes.
I did a coaching certificate, which was really nice. And so now I have a structure with which to give advice. And I mostly help entrepreneurs. Yeah. Just help people be happier and get more of what they want. So usually meet with clients for an hour a week.
Right.
And that's perfect for me. There are career coaches who all they do is coach. And I love to operate something else and just coach a couple hours here and there too.
Right. My path has been similar in the sense that I love the coaching, teaching side, but at the same time, I've always had businesses for decades, really, following those 2 tracks. Because then in your position and in mine, you're dealing with real life. This is how I executed this idea in this business, and here was the outcome. Yeah. And, here's my experience, and this did not work, and here's why.
And I can still resonate with it right now. Like there's even examples where you're like, I'm dealing with that in my business, and not just the past, and definitely not just hypothetical. Yeah, totally agree.
But very much in the moment.
Yeah.
What's the best way for our listeners to connect with you, Andrew?
So just through nostorylost.com is the easiest. I'm not big on social media personally. But the company's pretty small. So if you get to our website and fill out contact info there, you'll find me.
Okay. So what's your best tip to inspire others to start or grow their side hustle dream?
Okay, I love this one. It's borrowed from Steve Jobs. I hope someone else hasn't already quoted it.
Okay.
This was a quote that really gave me the energy early on. So I'll sum it up. He says, basically, everything around you that you call life was made up by people that were no smarter than you, and you can change it. You can influence the world. You can build your own things that other people can use. The minute you understand that you can poke life, and if you push something in, something will pop out the other side. When you learn that you can change the world and mold it, that's the most important thing. Embrace that, change it, improve it, make your mark on life. Once you learn that, you'll want to change life and make it better, and you'll never be the same again.
Great advice from Steve Jobs.
Well, I feel like I grew up and was like, okay, I'm in the world. I use the products, I buy the things, I go to the store, I do the stuff. But once you feel like, I can make one of those, I can create them, I can set up this site and someone can press buy. That's a pretty cool, powerful experience. And like we said earlier, then it rolls from there.
Yeah, because all those things that you see around you, even like the devices that we're connecting with right now, was nothing but an image on the screen of somebody's mind at one point. They thought, I could do this, or I could create this, or invent this. And then they connect with somebody like Jeremy, and you start brainstorming, and Pretty soon it's something that you're looking at and can share with the world. Well, thank you so much, Andrew, for your insights on starting and growing and running a successful nonprofit and your pivots to the corporate world with No Story Lost, lessons learned in business and life, and of course for being today's Side Hustle hero.
Thank you. It was fun. Good chat. Thanks for having me.
You might be surprised at how much you can earn while making a difference in the world. Most people see profit and purpose as two separate paths. Start a side hustle to make money and also volunteer to do good. But as Andrew's story shows, it's possible to build something that does both. Now, I'm not saying it's for everyone, but for someone who wants to give back to society or to their community and start a side hustle, it's a combination that I haven't seen explored all that much. I hope you enjoyed it and it sparked some ideas for you. Well, that's a wrap for today. If our chats are sparking your entrepreneurial spirit and providing valuable insights, consider showing your support by visiting sidehustlehero.com/support. That's where you can shoot me a virtual coffee. It's a real thing and a fun way to give the show a caffeinated thumbs up. Thank you so much. In the episode description, you'll find a link to connect with Andrew, as well as the full show notes, which live at our website, sidehustlehero.com. If you're enjoying what you're seeing in the podcast, it would be so appreciated if you would take a moment and add your comment, share the episode, and please subscribe. It'll let others know that there's valuable content here to help them start and grow their side hustle. Thanks for watching, and hustle on.